Landscape Gallery, Advanced Physical Therapy, Alaska Best Plumbing and Heating, Odom Corporation, State of Alaska DOT, Summer Sotheby's International Realty, River's Edge Resort, Sourdough Express, Credit Union One, and Equipment Source Inc. It's a fantastic long list, and we really appreciate the support of all of our members. Our membership minute today focuses around best practices. Recently, when I was in a group gathering, I noticed we'll start a presentation this way, just so that attendees feel informed and safe when they're in a new spot. Instead of just breaking down your emergency protocols and where to meet if there would be a fire or other emergency, also instruct them where they can hand sanitize and wash hands now that we are now adjusting to our new normal. So just keep in mind a couple best practices, and we hope that you use them in the coming weeks. Back to you, Sabrina.
Great, thank you so much. Members have renewed this year, and we can't thank you enough for your support, for bringing us the opportunity to continue these online live programs every week. So thank you, Brenna, for your work with membership. The Board of Directors to support high quality. If you have questions, see the statement behind this, you can contact the Chamber office. And now I'll invite Marisa to present her President and CEO report. Marisa?
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I do have a few announcements for our membership today, and I'll make them brief in the essence of making sure we preserve enough time for our presentation today. First, I just wanted to announce that next week we're officially kicking off our political forums series. There will be a total of 8 forums that will take us through the primary and general elections with an emphasis on contested races at the local, state, and federal level. Your business can support the election process by becoming a series sponsor. That means your sponsorship benefits will be spread out over that 2-month period of political forums and will align your business with getting out and voting with an informed vote. A series sponsorship is $500, and your business will be recognized at all 8 forums. You can find a full schedule of our political forum series on our website. I'd like to send an early thank you to the Hedgecock Group, real estate agency here in town, and also Mock Federal Credit Union for being the first members to support our series. Next, I'd like to tell you, it does feel like it's been forever since we've celebrated a business and a grand opening, but we do have one scheduled for this Friday. F&H Fitness Studio is celebrating their grand opening at their new location off of Airport Road in the Shoppers Forum Annex. Be sure to join us on Facebook for a live broadcast on Friday at 5:30 and get a sneak peek of their new space, learn about their offerings, and also about a great fundraiser and community connecting event that they have scheduled for next weekend. The Fairbanks Chamber is in collaboration with our photographer, Greg Martin, and we'll be hosting a headshot session on Thursday, August 27th, starting at 11 a.m. It's a great opportunity for offices looking to update their employee section of their website, for individuals that need to strengthen their online presence in these times where we're spending so much time in a digital space, and also for candidates that are seeking election for seat in public office. You can contact Katie here at the Chamber to book your time. And lastly, I just wanted to let everyone know that Golden Days are officially behind us now, and we are exceedingly grateful to all of the businesses and the individuals who gave generously of their time and their resources to help make Golden Days 2020 a huge success. Thank you especially to Sunrise Bagel and Espresso, Ken Ross Fort Knox, Alaska 529, and ConocoPhillips Alaska for being our presenting sponsors this year. Thank you also to each of our pod sponsors, our supporting sponsors, prize donors, in-kind donors, street fair vendors, parade participants, volunteers, and especially my team here at the Fairbanks Chamber. You all worked together to make it work in 2020, and I couldn't be more proud or more grateful for all of us to be a part of this community. You can find more information about any of the events or programs and more at our website, and that website is fairbankschamber.org. Thank you, and back to you, Sabrina.
Thanks, Marisa, and thank you and your team for all of the creativity that you instituted this year for a Golden Days that we will never forget. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce is a nonpartisan organization which advocates for the conditions that will allow businesses of all sizes to prosper in our region. We are focused on the betterment of all of our members by working with local, state, and federal government officials. The Chamber strives to represent the membership and address the multiple needs of the business community. Our goal today is to help you and the audience understand the decisions you will face during this fall's election cycle. The ballot measure being discussed today will appear on the general election ballot on November 3rd. Please note that you have a choice this fall whether to vote in person or by mail using an absentee ballot. You may request an absentee ballot from the state of Alaska by visiting their website at elections.alaska.gov. The deadline is August 8th to apply for your primary election ballot and August 24th for the general election ballot. Why not complete it today and get it out of the way? The format of today's event will be a little different than our usual lunchtime presentation, so I will quickly give you an overview. I will provide some basic information about ballot initiative number 2, the Better Elections Initiative. Alaskans for Better Elections campaign manager Shea Siegert and campaign counsel Scott Kendall will then provide an opening statement about the initiative. Then, Fairbanks Chamber volunteer Chad Hutchison will ask questions on behalf of the Chamber members. Audience questions will be taken at the end if time allows. If any of our online audience have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and type them into the chat box you see on YouTube. You will need a Google account in order to access that chat. Here's our initiative overview. The Alaska's Better Elections Initiative suggests a number of changes to the election process in Alaska. The 3 main changes include: number 1, establish top 4 nonpartisan primaries. All candidates, regardless of party affiliation, would appear on the same primary ballot, and the top 4 vote getters would advance to the general election. This could result in a general election ballot offering the choice between multiple candidates from the same party or a mix of candidates from different parties. The switch would also permanently open Alaska's primaries to all voters. Number 2, implement ranked choice voting. In a ranked choice voting system, voters rank candidates on their ballots in order of preference, first choice, second choice, etc. The first choice votes are counted first. If no candidate receives majority of first place votes, then an instant runoff is used. Voters who chose the candidate currently in last place have their votes redistributed to the other candidates based on the ranked order on each ballot until someone receives 51% of the vote. Number 3, campaign finance disclosure. This initiative would require disclosure of the source of any campaign contribution to a candidate independent expenditure group. Both donors and recipients would be required to disclose any contribution greater than $2,000 within 24 hours. Any group getting more than 50% of its funds from outside the state must provide a disclaimer with that information on all communications and advertisements. So now I'll introduce today's speakers that are here to help us better understand this initiative. Shea Siegert serves as campaign manager for the Yes on 2 for Better Elections campaign. He is an Anchorage resident who has worked in and around Alaska politics for 5 years. Shea got his start working with the Ship Creek Group on a slate of state house campaigns in the 2016 cycle and went on to work in the legislature over 3 legislative sessions. Shea also played a role on over 15 Alaska campaigns, including serving as interim campaign manager for Governor Walker. Shea plans to continue working, playing, and living in Alaska long after the next election. Welcome, Shea. Scott Kendall serves as counsel to the Yes on 2 for Better Elections campaign. Scott is an attorney at Holmes, Weddle, and Barcott, and most recently served as chief of staff to then Governor Bill Walker. For decades, Scott has worked all across Alaska in a variety of legal, political, and consulting roles. His wife, Selena Hopkins Kendall, was born and raised in Fairbanks, and together they raised their 2 children in Anchorage. Welcome, Scott. To lead the discussion today, we have Chamber volunteer Chad Hutchison. Chad was born and raised in Fairbanks, and I'm sure many of you listening know him well. He's been a longtime Chamber supporter and has bought and sold a lot of rubber ducky tickets over his lifetime. He is an attorney and has been the state Senate Majority Counsel since 2013, although today he is here in a strictly volunteer and personal capacity. Prior to working with the Senate starting in mid-2007, he was an attorney here in Fairbanks at Cook, Schumann, and Gross Close. Take it away, Chad.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. As Sabrina mentioned, Shea and Scott will start by giving us some opening remarks about Alaska's Better Elections Initiative, which is also known as Ballot Measure 2. So Shea and Scott, without further ado, please get us started.
Go ahead, Scott. I appreciate everyone being here, and I just really want to say thank you to the Fairbanks Chamber. We're really excited to be here. I'm really humbled to be in the presence of Chad Hutchison. I've worked alongside him in Juneau for the past 3 years or 3 sessions, and it's I aim every day to attack issues and everything with the grace and humility that he does, and I've learned a ton from being around him, and I appreciate him doing this, as well as all of the Fairbanks Chamber and that wonderful introduction. And with that, I want to hand it over to Scott to start us off.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Sabrina. Sabrina, I appreciate the fact that you've done, frankly, such a good job of discussing the mechanics of Ballot Measure 2. I don't feel the need to rehash it too much, although I'm sure we'll have a really good question and answer time. I think what we need to do is sort of center in on, Ballot Measure 2, why Ballot Measure 2 and why now? Ballot Measure 2 arose out of the efforts of a number of Alaskans. A half dozen or so of us got together, and a couple of Alaska attorneys got together and said, Alaska's known what its challenges are for a good long time now. They've seen, some of our fiscal issues, COVID and everything related to that aside, we've seen fiscal issues coming down the pipe for, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years. We've known we've had issues in terms of both spending and revenue and some other issues that we just can't seem to tackle. So our thought is, how do we break up that partisan gridlock? In a state like Alaska, where 62% of us don't affiliate with either major party, how are we in such a partisan stalemate? So that is where the genesis of Ballot Measure 2 arose out of. To sort of give you some background, since Sabrina did such a great job discussing the mechanics, I want to talk about some of the policy benefits of the reforms. First of all, one that I think Sabrina hit on quite well is, we're looking to encourage everyone to vote by mail. COVID is a serious issue, and I think, given the relative age of many of our poll workers, and just given the amount of spread we've got in the state, wouldn't it be nice at this moment if Alaska could do vote by mail? With the primary election, they really cannot. And the primary reason is the 2-ballot system we have. We have a semi-closed primary with a Republican ballot and a Democrat and everyone else ballot. So the Division of Elections is facing this issue where they could send all the Democratic ballots to Democrats, all the Republican ballots to Republicans, but the 62% of Alaskans otherwise, they'd have to send 2 ballots to. There'd be unsecured ballots all over the state, and that's not a great outcome. So we're in the situation we're in where you actually have to reach out, register for that absentee ballot, and do it in time. And certainly there's going to be some people who miss that cutoff who have to go and vote in person when they otherwise would not to. Our ballot measure goes to a single ballot primary, single ballot general. That issue goes away. Another issue that our ballot measure solves, it might not be readily obvious, is it solves the problem of partisan redistricting. Partisan redistricting is the process by which the state gets sliced and diced, and what's meant to be, at essence, a population balancing between House and Senate districts becomes an exercise where the party in control, sometimes Republicans, sometimes Democrats, attempts to carve districts in such a way as to benefit one party or the other, to give one party more seats out of proportion to its actual popular vote support. There's no secret about that. Both parties have done it. In a situation where you have 3 and 4 options, some of those options perhaps not aligned with a party, attempting to partisan redistrict becomes a zero-sum game, and we think our ballot measure also solves that problem. With that, I'll pass it back to Shea for a couple of other benefits.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott. And to touch on the coronavirus and other issues that we face today, look, from all the studies I've seen on the coronavirus, not a single one claimed that the coronavirus would wait for the Alaska legislature to act before it infects more people. The virus isn't the only issue that does not wait. Oil prices don't wait. The economy doesn't wait before it goes into recession. We have huge decisions to make in Juneau, and we have had them for quite some time now. And we need to have an electoral process that is more responsive to the people, and an electoral system that elects people that are more responsive to the issues. The reason our political system can't work like our businesses can is because the people at the top decide to ask what party someone is before they decide whether or not they can work with them. What is going to get me elected, and what is going to make the people I'm working with happy? Does this make sense for your business? And do you ask what party they are before you give? Does this work for your business? And do you ask an employee what party they are before you give them a new project? Or do you just get the best person there is to get the job done? Ballot Measure 2 is looking to incentivize working across partisan gridlock and looking to make a safe space in that nonpartisan aisle to get these big decisions done. Because let's face it, if we're going to address coronavirus and oil prices dropping and the recession and our fiscal crisis, we have to have people working across the letter that's next to their name. And the other thing that is just a statistical benefit to this is that the open primaries, when I go to the open primary, and I'm a registered nonpartisan, so I get to choose, and I'm more comfortable voting in the Republican primary because I came to being a nonpartisan from the Republican Party. And so I just got my absentee ballot in the mail. I had two candidates. I had 2 races to vote in. I had the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. There's no one in the state Senate. There's no one in the state House. And the fact of the matter is, if there are candidates that are going to be on the general, some of those will never show up on the primary ballot. And so what is my incentive to turn out when I have 2 races on my primary ballot? One of them is uncontested, and the other one is a surefire winner. What is the driver for me to turn out when I'm a nonpartisan and part of that 62% of Alaskans who choose not to register with either party? What is the incentive for those people to turn out for a nonpartisan who's not on the primary ballot? And what it does is increase primary turnout, which in turn increases general turnout. Because as we all know, people who vote in the primary are surely to vote in the general. And that is really quickly some of the indirect benefits of this policy. It's not all inclusive, but we want to get on and get back over to Chad so we can get on to questions. Thank you.
Well, Shea and Scott, thank you very much. Great opening statement, and you've given us some things to think about. Now I'm going to go into the question portion of the process today. And the questions that you're going to hear were circulated, and they are questions that the Chamber has regarding some of the details of the initiative. And as a reminder to our online audience, if you have additional questions, please type them into the YouTube chat box. The first question you answered, it talks about the timing and why the timing is right. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that one. I'm going to go to question 2, and it says, so far we have mostly talked about how individuals in the political process would be affected by Ballot Measure 2. The Fairbanks Chamber advocates for a productive business climate in interior Alaska. How would this initiative affect the ways in which businesses can participate in the political process? And we have about 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, so I'll take the first stab at that. And first of all, I think that it would be pretty easy to say, and pretty common a common feeling among this group is that coronavirus has affected businesses. It has affected individuals, but it's also affected businesses. And those businesses are looking to various entities to be responsive. And the government is one of those entities. The government in their small business loans, in how they administer those, and how they get federal funding and then quickly get it into the hands of people that really need it, and those small businesses that are struggling right now due to the pandemic. And what we want to see is a more responsive Juneau, someone that's not going to ask, you know, who voted for me, who donated to me before they say, okay, these funds are going to the best place possible and keeping our economy going. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to close that question out.
Yeah, I think the answer is relatively simple, and I think it reflects how it affects individuals too, is government functionality. Government doesn't function at its best when you've got two teams both trying to make the other fail. When you have government functionality, maybe things like CARES Act funding move quicker. Certainly, a balanced budget, a stable fiscal plan creates an environment that I think all businesses would appreciate. You know, no more roller coaster every year of what's the budget going to look like, what's the next proposal on the table. So really, working the problem rather than trying to set up the other side to fail. I think that's a win for individuals. That's a win for business.
Okay, very good. I'm going to move on to the next question now. So James Madison was known as the master builder of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He argued for a deliberative legislative process when it came to complex public policy topics. More locally, the Fairbanks Chamber has stated an advocacy position that ballot initiatives do not result in the best public policy because they do not subject the documents to detailed expert analysis. Ballot Measure 2, according to the Division of Elections, is 25 pages long and contains 74 sections of changes to Alaska's state law. This is one of the largest initiatives, volume-wise, to be presented directly to Alaskans on a ballot. This lengthy and complex initiative seeks to change Alaskans' fundamental rights involving voting, political speech, and political assembly. Shouldn't this type of fundamental change to our political system be subjected to more rigorous discussion and analysis rather than asking voters to simply vote yes or no on all changes? We have approximately 2 minutes.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. I think I'm going to turn that over to Scott first, and then I will end with a little anecdote about a legislative bill I saw.
Yeah, thanks, Shea. Thanks, Chad. So one of the main issues of why Ballot Measure 2 is lengthy is it's written in legislative style. It's completely transparent. Other ballot measures we've seen, including ballot measures on the ballot this year, aren't transparent about what do these changes do. What we decided as we put this together was if we're going to change the primary system, we know that's going to change, you know, how political parties have access to be poll watchers, have all these ancillary benefits, how people are appointed to the Alaska Public Offices Commission. So what we chose was we're making 3 fundamental changes, and they are fundamental and important, but we're going to be transparent about the fact that it's going to change some other things in an ancillary fashion. And the document's there, it's on our website, it's everywhere. You know, we can get it to anyone on this call, look at every page, and we can walk you through it. But the actual shorter ballot summary produced by the Attorney General, by the state, is a very succinct and accurate description of the changes. Second point, some people are fans of ballot measures, some are not. In certain areas, me personally, I am not. But this is a kind of issue where we can't expect the change to come from the legislature. You're going to ask 60 individuals who all got there by means of the current system, who most of whom all are members of one of the 2 major parties, to take power away from themselves and their parties and give it back to the voters. It was never going to happen. Bills have been introduced and they go nowhere on these issues. So this is a kind of change, much like campaign finance was back in the 80s, where the people have to kind of step up and say, we're the voters and we'll decide what level of control and power and information to give ourselves. And really, fundamentally, that's all it does. We're not saying we've got the solution to the problems. We're saying, voters, take back some of the power and information for yourself and you solve the problems. And I'll close with just one anecdote, which is John Adams, another of our founding fathers, had a statement, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me, but he basically said, the greatest threat to our democracy, to the government that we've established, is if 2 main political parties come to dominate our government. That's the greatest threat to democracy. That's where we are today. Go ahead, Shea.
Yeah, and so when Scott wrote this, and he touched on this in his remarks, he wrote it with a legislative drafter's mind in practice. And so what you see in front of you with the 25 pages is something that looks exactly like something that would be in the legislature. And so to give kind of a scope on the complexity of how it looks, when I got hired into the legislature 3 years ago, I went and was given a bill that was about 3 pages, and I can't remember the bill number, but I could probably find it. And I spent 3 days trying to figure out what that bill did. And I was trying and trying and trying, and I couldn't figure it out. And I went to someone a lot smarter than I am, and they said, this bill is changing the name of a bridge. And what I mean by that is that these are when we write legislative bills, they have to address definitions. They have to address which bridge they're changing the name of. They have to be clear. And so we took a route that was different than ballot measures in the past, and we wrote out exactly how we would like to see this enacted, and we put it in full transparency so that people knew exactly what they're voting on. We also reached out and had a legislative committee hearing, a second one on top of the first one that they had, and then had a second one with the House State Affairs Committee to really drill down what it is we're trying to do.
Well, thank you, Shea and Scott. I appreciate those answers. So we will go on to the next question now. It says the full text of the ballot initiative includes several additional changes to Alaska's election law beyond some of the points that we've even described just a few moments ago. For example, there's a changing of the appointment procedures for the people who oversee the fairness of our elections, and there's a changing of Alaska's federal election process. Can you help us understand these additional changes and why they are included?
Yeah, and I will hand that over to Scott for an answer for that.
Yeah, so I alluded to that in my prior question, but it's a great question because we get it a lot. So first of all, again, when you change, parties are largely defined how candidates how candidates in statewide elections finish. For example, party definition of party status is sometimes defined by whether your candidate in statewide races got over a certain percentage threshold. Another is that the top 2 parties that finished in a governor's race, that's how it's defined who gets appointed to the Alaska Public Offices Commission, which I think is what you were stating. What our system recognizes is if we're going to a system where, yes, some candidates, they can choose whether or not to identify themselves by party, but at the same time, there are no official party candidates because we're not running the party's nomination process for them anymore, which is currently what the state does. We're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to redefine party as you have so many members, such a percentage of Alaska's electorate registered with your party, you're an official party. That's meant to actually protect parties. What we didn't want to do is have the unintended consequences of coming in, making these changes, and then remove parties from public life. Parties have a role. Parties endorse candidates. They have platforms. They support issues. And we didn't want to do any unintended harm. Another is poll watchers, for example. So there's statutes about who's entitled to have someone watching the polls, making sure everything's going according to business. But if you're a non-party candidate, you might not have that right. So we've written in there that candidates also have that right to appoint a poll watcher, as would seem fair, because they're a candidate as well. With regard to federal elections, there's special elections and different nuances that come up in law, and we had to go through and make clear that these same election procedures would apply in those processes as well. It's not as simple as there's a primary and a general, because there's also, in the case of resignation or deceased, that there's special elections. So we had to make all of these changes, again, in line with making it all consistent and not forcing, basically, Chad, you might appreciate this, but a bunch of legislative attorneys have to go, here's 3 changes, now clean up our mess. We've cleaned up the mess. We've put all the language in. We've showed the deletions in line. We've showed the additions in line. So hopefully what they've got there is just something that, boom, they can put it in the statute books and we're off and running. But really, they're just these ancillary changes that are a result of these changes, not additional changes that are hidden. We'll discuss, line by line, we discuss anything in the bill. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. And Shea, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think Scott got it there, Chad. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate the answer, and we will move on to the next question. And I'm sure you've probably heard bits and pieces of this throughout the state, and we have a similar spin on the theme. So we talked about transparency, and we appreciate the campaign's desire to help Alaskans understand who is spending money to influence elections in the state. The Fairbanks Chamber has raised concerns in previous election cycles about the funding of ballot initiative campaigns. There was a review of APOC this morning, and since the Q4 of 2019 until the end of Q2 of 2020, of the $1,055,003.87 total income reported, $1,043,393.87 was from national out-of-state entities such as United America from Denver, Colorado, Represent.us from the address of Florence, Massachusetts, and Voters' Right to Know from Sausalito, California. In other words, 98.9% of the total contributions so far, both monetary and non-monetary, are from out-of-state entities. Why should Alaskan voters support this effort if it is primarily driven by outside groups? And we have about 2 minutes for the answer.
Yeah, and I would say one thing is that we do have over 150 Alaskan individuals invested in this campaign as well. They've given us donations, and the difference here is that those other campaigns you spoke of having concern, which other campaigns would tell you that the true sources of our income from out of state are Catherine Murdoch and John and Laura Arnold? Those are the people that are behind those companies, and you can go out to Unite America and figure out and see how many different people, or not how many, but who are the people that are donating to Unite America, because they have to disclose it because of the classification of their corporation. And then with Action Now initiative, you can also feel rest assured that John and Laura Arnold, that is their initiative. They are the true funders of that. And that is, we are the only campaign that is disclosing exactly who our true funders are. And we are open and honest about that from the get-go. And with that, I'll hand it over to Scott.
Yeah, so this gets at actually part of ballot measure 2, which is the dark money disclosure, which really we're focused on candidates because, of course, candidates under Citizens United are the ones who receive the funding, and the concern there being candidates, candidates can be corrupted. If someone spends $2 million to support them, are they going to get a better shake from that elected official? Whereas a ballot measure is words on paper. To some degree, it's incorruptible. It is what it is, and it means what it says. That being said, we are actually making the decision to go beyond disclosure. We could easily have done what most entities do, which is set up, sort of a shell corporation within a shell corporation and say, oh, look, it came from this Alaska group that then, it happens to be funded by another Alaska group and then some outside entities. What we're saying is this was created and drafted in Alaska by Alaskans, and we've been very fortunate that some of these philanthropists have kind of come on board. John and Elizabeth Arnold are two philanthropists. They do a ton of non-political work, and they're concerned primarily about education policy and other things being politicized. We proudly accept their support. Catherine Murdoch is another person who she cares about climate change and some other issues. I think immigration is another one that have been politicized. She thinks we need reform. We support reform for the same reason she does. We're actually going to go through another iteration of our website that doesn't even make you take that next step of, okay, we got it from Unite America or something like that. We're actually going to link to articles about the individuals who have donated to us, because we think, folks have taken an interest in Alaska. What else is new? I think Alaska's 2014 U.S. Senate race had something like $56 million come from outside the state. I think certainly voters have a right to know where that money comes from and take that into account. But again, there's no subterfuge on our part. We think people are supporting these ideas because, frankly, they're good ideas. And you see these ideas propagating in Massachusetts, in North Dakota right now. Across the country is a proliferation of folks saying business as usual isn't getting it done. We need better solutions, better elections. So not only can we get maybe some new people in who can get the job done, but maybe we will bring out the best in our current elected officials if they are not facing the specter of a closed primary system that will punish them whenever they do the right thing for their state.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate those answers. So we're going to move on to the next question. It was brought up before. It's the term dark money. Can you please explain the term dark money as it is used in ballot initiative 2 And how was the $2,000 threshold determined for mandatory reporting, and what would be considered a true source under this definition? And you have approximately 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question and an important piece to our initiative. And I'll let Scott define it in the legal sense, and I'll define it in the sense that I understand it to be, which is it's focusing on the question that you just asked. What we didn't do was shield you with a bunch of, we have over 40,000 signatures from people around the state. We have over 150 individuals donating from around the state. What we did was we told you that true source. We told you exactly the individuals where this money is coming from. And when money is disclosed, when we tell people where the true source comes from, that brings it out of a dark money portion or category and brings it into a light money category. And so it completely outlaws the ability to give in excess of $2,000 without disclosing your name and attaching your name to that money. No longer can you say, I want to influence the votes in Alaska, but yet I don't want to connect my name to that. You can't do that once ballot measure 2 passes, and then I'll hand it over to Scott for the legal background on that.
Yeah, so dark money is money that is both unknown and unknowable to a voter. A voter goes, and no matter what they do, they can't really suss out where this money came from. So we're all used to political entities in Alaska, and they've got a name like Alaskans for Apple Pie or Alaskans Love Salmon or whatever, but they're donated to by another entity. Often those entities are used as shells or shields for the actual donor. So a true source is the individual, the entity, the corporation that earned or inherited that money. Now, what could happen in the status quo is a large organization, like I'll make something up, like the American Automakers of America does all sorts of work, but one individual member of that group really wants to impact Alaska's governor's race. And they, from their place, their home in Houston, Texas, or Louisiana, says, I'm donating $5 million to you, Auto Manufacturers of America. You give it to this entity in Alaska. And under current law, there's nothing to stop that. And so we never know that this one individual gave the money. So what we're doing is we're drilling back to the true source. Whoever donated, if you want, you have free speech rights. Every corporation does after Citizens United. But if you want to spend money in politics in Alaska, we will know your name. And that's the limitation we're putting on. And right now, that's not the case. The reason, just to go off on a tangent, the $2,000 threshold is meant to sort of exempt like true membership organizations. So the NRA, their individual members, folks don't pay more than $2,000 a year to be members of the NRA. NRA stands for certain values. They communicate those values. They're considered like a true membership organization, not like an entity that would, basically be transferring money through in large sums. So that's the reason for that threshold, to set a reasonable threshold for these trade groups and other organizations and membership organizations, so they can kind of keep their integrity of what their message is. But when you're moving more than $2,000 in a race, we feel like, okay, you're a sophisticated political player at that point. We need to know your name.
Well, thank you for those answers. So I have just a brief follow-up there. I think it was mentioned there's 150 Alaska donors. Do we know how much money has been contributed from those Alaskans for the campaign?
I believe the last average I had was about $75 per person. And as anyone knows who's worked on a state house race, if you have a $75 per person average, you're doing pretty well.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate that. So it's now 12:41. I'm going to try to move on to the next 2 questions here, and then we'll go directly into audience questions. And Scott, you mentioned this, Citizens United. I think we looked at Section 1 of the ballot initiative, and it states that the people of Alaska find the United States Supreme Court has erroneously changed the meaning of the First Amendment and appears to put the state on record in favor of restricting political speech, contrary to Citizens United, the U.S. Supreme Court precedent. What is the intended effect of including this on the ballot initiative? I think you've referenced it a little bit, Scott, but if you could elaborate a little bit more, and Shea, we would appreciate that in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, and it's important distinction there. There's no, a ballot measure as a matter of state law, of course, cannot change federal law. Federal law, the state of the art in federal law is that corporate speech is allowed. Corporate speech, so long as it's not coordinated with any candidate. So that's Citizens United. In 2010, that case came out and we kind of saw the rise of the super PACs. That's seen by many folks as a negative development because now states have had taken away from them the right to regulate that speech in any way, shape, or form. And that's a statement of policy back. That's part of the ballot measure. That's non-operative language. That's just sort of a framing device. But it raises a really good and important and interesting point is the Citizens United decision, if you read it, says this money equals speech. You can't restrict this speech, but here's the solution to the problem. Disclosure is the disinfectant that will prevent any corruption or any bad outcomes from all this money washing about in our politics. The problem being Citizens United blew a hole through the disclosure and requirements and restrictions of all 50 states. And very few states have caught up to that. So now our ballot measure, at least the dark money provision, is intended to start to kind of push back, not push back in the sense that we can change Citizens United, but push back in the sense that we've got this money washing around and our disclosure requirements are very flimsy. You can, without too much trouble, shield from public eye who's donating the money. So that's sort of the genesis of that segment is a lot of this, the dark money requirement, is a necessary response to Citizens United from back in 2010.
And Shea, do you have anything to add to that?
No, he did a great job.
Okay, well, very good. And we have an audience question, and I'm going to go ahead and just hold this question. I think this audience question, just in the interest of time. So I'm reading right now, how does the nonpartisan primary system proposed in this initiative differ from the blanket primary we used to have in Alaska?
And I'll hand that over to Scott for a little bit better explanation, as I believe he may have voted it under the old blanket primary system. So that'll be good.
Yeah, so there is some confusion because, of course, as a preface to all this, for the first 40 years of Alaska's existence, we had what's called blanket primaries, similar but slightly different than open primaries. So a blanket primary had every candidate for an office, but strangely, the Ds were competing against the Ds, the Rs against the Rs, AIP against AIP, and so forth. So you had one ballot, one set of candidates, but your vote only counted in a subset of those candidates. What happened with that system is, I believe in 2000, the US Supreme Court said blanket primaries are unlawful, and here's why, which is an important distinction, is these primaries are are a system put in place for the state to run the party nomination process officially for the parties. So whatever we get out of that blanket primary system is, here's the official Democrat, here's the official Republican, and so on. What's different is an open primary that says everyone on one ballot, everyone can name whatever party they identify with, but we're just taking the top finishers regardless of party. We're saying, in Alaska, sometimes we like the AIP, sometimes we like the nonpartisan. Maybe our two top choices are Democrat, maybe our two top choices are Republican, but it's only taking the top four finishers. And in a case in, I believe, 2008, might be wrong on the year, the US Supreme Court has approved that system. They're saying if you have a system where you just rank the candidates according to how they finish in a primary and you're not picking the official candidate for a party, then open primaries are perfectly okay. And that's the difference, is the parties are over here off to the side, and they can, through convention or meetings or a private caucus process, actually officially endorse whatever candidate they wish. That's still their power. But the process run by the state is, at its heart, a nonpartisan process. It's just who gets the most votes.
Well, thank you. And Shea, do you have anything to
I
add?
have nothing to add to that. Nope, I'm good, Chad. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We will go on to the next question then. It says that Alaska's political parties have raised concerns about how this initiative would affect their right to choose their candidates in elections. It seems possible that this initiative may be challenged in the courts on these grounds. Certainly, there have been historical constitutional questions, including open questions with negative case history, that remain today. How would you address the concern that the new election process violates the party's First Amendment rights of political association? And we have about 2 minutes or so.
Yeah. Well, I want to address something right off the get-go, is that, I think the parties would agree that the most important part to being a party is the voters, and the voters should have the choice to vote in or out who they want. Now, the problem is that, on the Republican primary side, you have undeclareds and nonpartisans who get to vote in there, and you have nonpartisans and undeclareds who get to vote in on the Democratic side. Now, those voters should be able to choose, just like anyone who's registered as an R or a D or an NP or a U. They should have, all of our voters should be treated the same regardless of partisan line. And I think that the big thing to remember here is that elections need to be about the voters. It should not be about the politicians, and it should never be about the parties. If the parties believe that the voters having more power is going to somehow take power away from them, well, that might just be a whole nother issue. And I'm not part of a party anymore, so you might have to ask them. But with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about the constitutional issues again and kind of the more legal side.
Yeah, and I think I answered part of the question with my prior answer, but I want to kind of restate it is, first of all, the issue of this kind of primary, an open primary, was settled at the U.S. Supreme Court on a 7-2 decision. It's the, I believe, Washington State Republican Party versus Washington State Grange case. But that is asked and answered, so to speak. So they maintain their First Amendment right because, of course, they can endorse whoever they wish. They can say, this is the Democratic candidate, this is our official candidate. What is taken away from them is something that was never promised. So currently, they get to act as gatekeepers to the ballot. There's a D slot and an R slot by default. And through the current process, they get to, and if a candidate withdraws, of course, the party itself gets to just hand select someone and plop them in spot. The problem with that operationally is you have sometimes 9% turnout, sometimes 7% turnout. So out of that 7%, is the state comfortable with the fact that 4% of the electorate in a district can decide who the candidate is? And in some cases, in strongly partisan districts, decide who wins. So this ballot measure seeks to remedy that, again, with all of the parties' First Amendment rights intact. And an important observation here is, as our founders of our Constitution set up the Constitution and they discussed the political process at long length, but what's not in the Constitution anywhere is the term political party. Political parties running their nomination process for them is an artifact of what came out of the U.S. Supreme Court decision that tore down the old blanket primary system. It was kind of forced upon Alaska, and we've been muddling through ever since. This kind of puts us back as close to that status quo as possible.
Well, thank you very much, Scott and Shea. So that's all the time we have for questions. As a reminder to all the members, the ballot measure will appear on the November 3rd general election ballot, so you have a little time for research if you have any further questions. I want to thank both you gentlemen for providing good, thorough answers. Some of those questions were not easy. There's no doubt about that. So we appreciate your preparedness and your thoroughness. So with that, back to you, Sabrina.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you again for being with us today. Shea, Scott, and Chad, really appreciate you providing us with this entry into this year's political season. And to our listeners, thank you all so much for joining us today and taking the time to inform yourself about the upcoming ballot. You can share this link with your friends and family. We're all stronger if we're more informed, I would say. We hope you'll join us next week as we kick off our Political Forum series. So the next 2 weeks will be dedicated to the candidates running in the state primary elections. On next Tuesday, August 4, we will hear from the Democratic candidates, and the following Tuesday, August 11th, we will hear from the Republican candidates. Thanks again for your support of these weekly presentations, which really serve to maintain our connections with you, our very valuable members. Enjoy your week, everyone. Be well, Fairbanks.